Okay, it is 5:01. We will call the Administration Committee meeting to order for September 12th, 2023. Roll call, please.
Chair Cook,
Present.
Vice Chair Counter,
Present.
Supervisor Long,
I am here.
Supervisor Fiedler, Supervisor Burning.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Our first item, approval of minutes from Tuesday, July 18th, 2023. Any changes to the minutes, if we remember what we did in July, since we had a month off? All right, if there are no changes, we'll let the minutes stand. Public comment. Do we have anyone here in the audience for public comment? Anyone for public comment? Anyone for public comment? All right, no public comment. Let's move on to our business items. First item is financial reports for August 2023. Ken.
Yep, the financial report is in the packet. There's just a couple of items I was going to point out for you. Let me scroll to those pages. So in the 1410, which is administration, I was going to point out this big red number right here under other professional services. So it looks like I'm way overspending on that. That's actually the where we're going to be doing the grant for the mapping of the broadband. That's where that project's going to come. We'll have additional revenues that offset that, but it does look negative there. So I did want to point that out. And then the next one that I wanted to point out. It's not as noticeable in this format. When you look at the monthly format where we go through, it stands out a lot more. But the month of July, we had we average about $800,000 to $900,000 a month in health insurance claims. So that averages out to about $10 million per year. The month of July, we had $2.1 million in health insurance claims. So there was this sort of this huge spike. Now the good news is that we have reinsurance at $175,000 per claim. So the $1.9 million claim from that month is mostly reinsured. So we'll be getting that money back. But if you were following that at all, or if you compare back to previous months, you'll see it jump dramatically over this summer. So I just wanted to reassure you that there'll be a revenue that offsets that through the insurance recoveries. So that's why we have reinsurance. Those are the two big things that I wanted to point out on the financial report for this month. Otherwise, I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Yes, Supervisor Counter.
With that spike, is it just like an anomaly, or is it something where there could be trend to that, or what do you see?
No, there probably is a trend to that. It's an individual case, though. And so any additional cost would also be covered. So the way we do health insurance, reinsurance is any individual, we pay the first $175,000 in actual costs. So we self-insure for that first $175,000, and then any cost above that, our reinsurance kicks in and we're reimbursed for those costs. So once you've exceeded that, we get reimbursed. And we average, usually 2 to 3 people on our plan that will go over that limit every year, so that's expected. A claim of that size, though, very, very unusual, and it really, it had a dramatic effect on the financials. If you're watching it all, if you charted it all, it'd be a huge spike up.
Any other questions from members? No? All right, thank you. We will move on to our next item, resolution approving alteration of supervisory district boundary, City of New Richmond, Town of New Richmond, and Town of Stanton. Christine.
Good evening. So the information regarding these annexations starts on page 34 of your packet. There were 2 annexations into the City of New Richmond, one from the Town of Richmond. It was a total of 199.5 acres. Population of that is 0. It was part of wards 1 and 2 in County Supervisory District 14, and is now part of Ward 6 of County Supervisory District 13. The second annexation was from the town of Stanton. It was a total of 57.24 acres annexed into the city of New Richmond again. Population again is 0. It was part of Ward 2 of Supervisory District 11 and now will be part of Ward 2 in Supervisory District 12. I don't know if anyone has any questions on them, if you were able to look at them.
Any questions by members? No? Is there a motion? All right, motion by Supervisor Long, second by Supervisor Fiedler. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item number 3, consideration of reclassification request for civilian bailiff from grade 41 to grade 52. Audrey.
So HR received a request to conduct a wage analysis of our judicial district to ensure that our civilian bailiff position was graded appropriately for the current market situations. After conducting a full analysis, it is our recommendation to regrade the position from a grade 41 to a grade 52. The estimated fiscal impact will be about $1,500 per year on that.
Any questions? No, Supervisor Fiedler.
I'd like to just raise the fact that this is a very important position. And this is the face of the county when jurors come in. It's the liaison from the juries to the clerk of court, from the judges to the jurors. And I fully support raising them to the degree we've done. But I think actually they're even more worthwhile in terms of pay and recognition than we've taken into consideration. I noticed in the memo it had been considered that they would go up several more steps, which means about another $1 an hour. But I know we have Judge Needham here and the clerk of court. Maybe they could be asked about their interrelationships with the bailiff and what they think of the magnitude of that position. Might be helpful.
Sure. Would you like to come up?
Yeah, Supervisor Fiedler said our civilian bailiffs are the face of really our courts in terms of meeting jurors when they report for jury trials and then attending to them throughout the trial. And best example is Judge Waterman starts a 3-week trial tomorrow. And it's a high-profile, serious criminal case. And we always opine that if a bailiff makes a mistake, it's not only the cost, but potentially due process as well as a number of other considerations. I'm not sure how you classify these positions. These are people who we ask to put their lives on hold because we can't guarantee a schedule. And we give them a month at a time and say, these are your weeks for coverage if we have trials, but if we don't, they don't get paid, and they really have impact in terms of their schedules. We lost a bailiff within the last couple of months for that exact reason because although retired, as I'm told, your schedules are sometimes more busy than if you're full-time employed. And he just couldn't any longer say, well, I have a jury trial next week and then get called the day before saying that trial is now off. And so he gave up that employment. We're now down to 2. We're going to start a 3rd bailiff tomorrow. But again, $17 an hour I can make at Walmart. I can earn $20 at Quick Trip. And these are positions, again, that in my mind should warrant greater compensation. I'm not sure how we ended up with the clerk, of course, being responsible because statutorily, I believe it's the sheriff who is responsible for attending to the courts and making sure that we have bailiffs available to the courts. And as I suggested to Christy, if we're going to pay law enforcement to act as our bailiffs, you're not looking at $17 an hour. But we're comfortable with continuing our civilian and Christy trying to recruit and retain. But it's a bigger project, I think, than just tonight's discussion in terms of should we be paying on-call pay, similar to what we do other positions who have to be on call. Should we be looking at something greater than what's being proposed here? So that's my position. It's not enough, but it's better than what we've got.
Supervisor Fiedler.
And I agree with what the judge said. I don't have a specific proposal to make tonight, I could throw something out, but I think more thought should go into it than my just throwing out a number and throwing out a dollar amount per week when they're on call. And so I might suggest that we have a sense of the committee that we recognize the importance of the position, authorize Audrey to come back to us at the next meeting, or Ken to send a communication to us with a further recommendation based on our finding that we would like to see the plaintiffs properly remunerated given the importance of their position, and see what comes back to us. But I think the judge outlined something, just at least a couple dollars more per hour, and something when they're on hold for weeks at a time. So it'd be a kind of a sense of the committee if people agreed with that general discussion we've just had.
Yeah. Supervisor Long?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that we got to look at some of the other options, as the judge pointed out. So the reclassification makes a lot of sense, but maybe it shouldn't end here. So I would agree.
I just have a clarifying question then. So you're suggesting that you might table it, send it back for reevaluation, or to approve this and then just have us further analyze it for an additional recommendation?
Supervisor Long?
Yeah, I guess got it. I would recommend that we go ahead and approve this and then extend the analysis afterwards, at least to make the first step, so to speak.
Is that a motion?
So, yes,
Supervisor
I'll
Long?
move to approve the reclassification.
All right, motion by Supervisor Long,
Second?
second by Supervisor Fiedler. Any other discussion? Do you have clarity then on what we're asking? Okay.
And I think that there is some urgency in it, so I mean, I think this could be done fairly quickly and maybe even be able to come back to us before we go to the next steps in the process. So this isn't meant to be, a year-long survey of the need. It's meant to be, come back to us in 2-3 weeks before we pass the budget.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Our next item, resolution providing additional compensation increase for civilian bailiffs. Audrey?
So based on the conversation we just had about the regrade of that position, by regrading the position, it does create some compression issues so that at the time of this study, we had 2 openings. We just hired somebody, but that all new hires would be placed at the same step as our existing experienced staff who have already been here for 4 to 7 years. So it's our recommendation to approve additional compensation for the existing employees, placing them at a step on the wage grid that is proportionate to their years of experience. This pay increase would have an annual impact of approximately $300.
So based on our discussion that we just had, does it make sense to do this now as well, or from your perspective? Or I'm just not sure from the administrative
Right.
standpoint, like what that,
Ken, you may have a
What
different
means?
opinion, but yeah, I would still feel confident, and at some point, it's always going to create this compression
Yep.
issue, even if we went grades higher. So in the meantime, let's get them up to the pay that they deserve at this point where we're at in the study anyway, and then we can always move forward from there if needed.
okay. Any discussion by members? Is there a motion from it?
I would motion to approve the increase for civilian bailiffs for additional compensation.
All right, motion by Supervisor Counter. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Long. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Our next item, resolution for amendment number 4 to the 2023 budget for ARPA uses. Ken?
Yeah, as the ARPA projects, we received the $17 million from the federal government, which is the ARPA. For the projects, the county boards allocated all of those funds out, but as some of those projects are closing, they're closing under budget, which is good in one hand, that, departments are staying under budget, but bad that we have until the end of 2024 to spend the funds. And so we've come up with a new list of allocations for what we can do for these. When I was looking at what to do with the ARPA dollars, it reminded me of a time when I tried beekeeping. There was decided I was going to go out and try it, so I went to a local beekeeper and I said, "Can I get 12 bees?" And he went back and he came back with a box, and the box had a clear top, and I was counting them, and there was actually 13 bees in there. I says, "Well, that's great," but I go, "You have one extra bee." He goes, "No, that's a freebie." So the ARPA dollars is a freebie that we have, so we have to decide how to spend that money. The staff's laughing because that's like the third time
Comedian,
today I've
yeah.
told that joke, but
We're an entertaining committee for anyone watching, right? You're trying to provide some excitement.
so with the freebie money that we got from the federal government, deciding what to do with that. So there's a couple of things. I'm going to see if I can blow the screen up a little bit because I'm having trouble reading it from that far away. All right, so the extra projects that we're looking at. So the county clerk is looking at some new meeting software, which would have an implementation cost of about $50,000. And this would replace the software that we use to create the agenda packets and Amy's using right now to create the minutes. So it replaces that software. Does it also replace the voting equipment? Oh, Christine's left, so. The other project then that we have is Justice Support Services, $75,000. This would cover some capital cost to outfit the service center in New Richmond for drug testing and also increase our current drug tester from, I think, like 60% up to 100%. So the increased cost for the wages and benefits for that employee. So that'll provide more hours for testing, and it'll also provide 2 different locations. We'd split that one employee between the 2 locations. And that would fund it through 2024. It would give us a good test run to see if that's a worthwhile, the way we think it's going to be. The third item on here, CASA support. So $300,000, it's a huge dollar amount, but CASA's been a very popular program. The judges really like it. It's been beneficial. The problem I think that they're seeing is that there's such a new nonprofit organization that they're trying to ramp up that fundraising, and they're spending it just as fast as they can fundraise it. Really what they need is a shot in the arm to get a step ahead. So the $300,000, $100,000 this year to go along with the $40,000 we've already given them, and then $200,000 next year, will give them that financial security. It'll cover their operating costs. It'll make them comfortable enough that the fundraising they're doing is always going to be for the following year. So that organization gets on a financial cycle that's sustainable, and they can always look out long-term then of how to manage that organization. So I think it's important for them to do it that way. And the benefit for us to classify this as an ARPA project then is it takes it off of the tax levy. So I've removed it from my budget recommendation, so there's no tax levy support going to CASA. It's going to be ARPA funded. But by the time this ends, then in 2025, we would expect that their private fundraising efforts will be enough to sustain that organization.
Supervisor Long.
Yeah, it's a rather large amount. I'm a lot concerned about their inability to fundraise for that program. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of the program. I think it's great, but I have to ask the question, are there other factors or other reasons that are contributing to their inability to fundraise other than being a new organization? And maybe we don't know, but I have to ask the question because I'm concerned about that.
Yeah.
I don't want to set a precedent of the county funding the organization when it's supposed to be funded primarily through fundraising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think two of the reasons I think that they're struggling right now, in talking with Sean, their executive director, one is that some of the foundations look at the longevity of a nonprofit before they qualify them for fundraising. And so being a new organization, they haven't been tested yet to determine whether they're would meet their eligibility criteria. So that's, I think they're running into a little bit of that. And then two, I don't know that they've ferreted out all of their potential sources yet. And so I think they need to take more time and develop those relationships and those funding cycles that they can grow into. And what this funding does is it allows them to grow into those two things.
Supervisor Counter?
With that, is the CASA program put together like any form of a business plan or something that they have established that helps them so that when they do go out for organizations generally that are involved with giving out money for different programs like that, look to the organization of how they're structured and that they have a viable way that they're looking at how how's their incomes coming in, how's their expenditures, so that they have somewhat of a model that they're using to sell themselves as they're attempting to get the funding.
Yeah, I guess I don't know specifically if they have a business plan. I've seen some of their pro formas and stuff, so I know they have pieces of it, but I don't know if that I've seen a whole plan. And they may have one, I don't have that much in-depth knowledge of their organization.
I would like to see us keep CASA support in here. I think it's an important organization. You mentioned it's the judges are supportive of it. I mean, services that are really working with our most vulnerable St. Croix County residents, children. And so I think having it as ARPA funding is actually a great idea because it also communicates to the organization that this is a limited time. It's not on the tax levy. It's not something that's built into the budget all the time. So we're saying we have ARPA funds for this number of years. Here's your chance to actually build up the organization. And having worked in nonprofit entities in the past, I mean, if you're going out for grants, they do want to see outcomes and they want to see results. And that is how you are analyzed as you apply for grant money. So if this can give them that shot in the arm, like you were mentioning, to actually focus on those outcomes, focus on the results, and then build up the organization, I think once the ARPA funding is done, which it is a time-limited situation, they could likely be able to, hopefully they'll be able to support themselves. But we're putting it as ARPA fundings, we are communicating that we have expectations that this is short-term, it's not long-term, and perhaps it can give them that support they need to keep the program moving forward because, it's working with our kids that are in the justice system, and I think that's very important.
I'd be very short. I just want to join in all three comments that were just made. I think they were just perfectly captured the essence of the issue and where we should be and the message we should send to them that a couple of years out they should be raising the money on their own.
So, yep, Supervisor Burning.
So this is one of 128 pages that I printed off specifically because I did have some concerns about that dollar amount. So the restrictions on this money, is this that unrealized losses or the component of it? Or
This would be for the specific population groups category.
Okay, so the reason we would put this under CASA support is because there's a designation in the ARPA funds that this would allow. Is there anything else inside of our capital improvement plan that we could utilize some of that money? Because what we're doing is we're speaking, I mean, we are literally allocating dollars for 2 years when, I guess, this year and next year. I don't know if I'm in favor of that or not, or if we could split the difference on this and find something else inside the KIP that we can alleviate, because we've got a lot that we need to cover, including getting more help for law enforcement. That, I think that needs to be front and center before anything else at this point. So is there a way to cut that in half and find another area of the KIP that we could apply 150,000 to?
So the last item on there is the government center HVAC components. So HVAC is authorized capital expenditure, anything related to quality of air in indoor buildings. So we have over $900,000 right now in expenses that I can attribute directly as an ARPA project. So any dollars that I spend using ARPA dollars free up other dollars within the KIP for other things. So I may not be funding something on that capital project list, but if I fund an existing project with other sources, it frees up the dollars we currently have that would have gone towards it to one of the other projects. So indirectly, it funds something else, because it all comes out of that same capital project fund.
Yeah, totally. I get that. But I guess what I'm asking is there a way to make it so that we can get law enforcement more help? I mean, is there a way to use some of these dollars, move them somewhere and free up capital that's here, that's left over from our recurring budget this year, to be able to do that?
Yeah, see, it's operating expenses though. So law enforcement personnel is an ongoing operating expense, whereas capital projects are a one-time expenditure. And so we tend to treat those differently in how we allocate revenue sources to those.
Yeah, totally. So I understand that, but a lot of the revenues that we're taking for capital improvement is left over from operating levy that did not get used up in budgets this year. And we have that happen quite often year over year, I think, continuously. And so I guess my point is, why don't we budget for more law enforcement then instead, and actually put our feet to the fire to have to borrow for some of this if we have to, and really put us to the test and borrow if we need to get these done. But we somehow, I guess I'm stressing the point that we need to get our law enforcement help. There's no question about that. So I would vote for this if we could take 150,000 and move it into some sort of project in the KIP, and then reallocate those dollars to find more law enforcement, and then push that, try to make a trend to push that into the future so that we can continue to have that. So that's my, I don't know, do I need to make an amendment on that? Should that?
Well, there's no motion yet.
Yes,
so.
right. Okay, so there's no motion yet. All right. So I'll wait until someone makes a motion to bring this to the floor. So should we even be discussing this?
Yeah, so at a committee level, you can discuss.
Okay,
before
yeah,
motion's
all right,
made.
cool. So I'll wait until there's a motion, and then I'll do all my fun magic. And
Okay, and I think we have other projects to go through still, right? Unless, yep, Supervisor
Question,
Long.
so in essence, what you're suggesting, Supervisor Burning, is that it's okay to create a structural deficit at this point?
No, I'm not.
But wouldn't we be, Ken?
Yeah, technically. Yeah, anytime you use one-time funds, so you're going to reallocate 150,000 out of the capital projects to the sheriff's office to fund a position, but in 2025, there's no funding for that then. So that creates that's what a structural deficit is that we have an unknown revenue source to cover it in a future year. So we can cover it in 2024. 1 year out, that's usually no problem. We can usually see that far out. It's 25, 26, 27, the future years that get beyond that. How are we going to continue to cover?
Okay, so if I may.
Yep.
Okay, so no, I am not saying that at all. I want that abundantly clear. I am saying we continuously have inside of our budget each year dollars that spill over from the previous year or are moved from the prior year that were levied against our taxpayers for operational uses that then go into a undesignated fund balance is probably the right terminology. I hope, correct me if I'm wrong. And then we generally have in the range of $3-ish million quite consistently, correct? That we use to then fund capital improvement projects, which tells me that we are over, at this point, from an operational standpoint, we are over levying our taxpayers and under delivering in actual services such as the law enforcement that is needed to cover this county. So structural deficit, no. What we need to do is we need to relook at that and figure out why that is. And I know some of the reasons why, and I get it. Positions may not be filled. There may be, a resignation that leaves a big gap. I get all of that. But if that's consistent year over year, and we're looking at $550,000 wire mesh screenings, and we're looking at $250,000 fleet vehicle replacements, I mean, these are all things that if we have to put our feet to the fire to borrow on, if we can make it a priority the next year to budget it in, we're going to find generally over the last several years, $3 million that we can use to help get our men and women in law enforcement the reinforcement that's needed. That's what I'm saying. No structural deficit. We can make it a priority. So that's what I'm saying.
Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, this is, for this agenda item, we're talking about ARPA funds, right? We're not talking about our operating budget, right?
Correct, we are. And we will get to that part of it. So I don't think it's not germane to tonight's agenda.
Right.
But for this
But
agenda,
for this item,
yeah,
we're really talking about ARPA funds, correct?
correct, yeah.
Okay.
If you could let me venture just a little bit into that.
Yeah.
So we budget $1 million under the state projection for our sales tax. We do that intentionally so that we end up in the black every year. Because what we want to do is we want to take our undesignated fund balance and move it into the KIP. Because then we can avoid debt issuance costs, we can avoid interest expense. So it's a tool that we're using purposefully to help reduce future costs for the taxpayers. Now, that's a policy decision. So you can change that. So you can say we don't want to budget $1 million under, we want to budget $500,000 under and go hire 4 more patrol deputies. You can make that policy decision. So when we get to the budget, that would be the place to do it, and that would be the mechanism how to do it. I'm just going to recommend that you keep the $1 million, but that is a method that you can have.
Oh, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I
Supervisor
was
Fiedler.
going to say something like Ken just said to our Supervisor Bernie, that we've got a couple more opportunities tonight to save the taxpayer dollars and look at some things for law enforcement. And although I think he makes some very good points on this particular issue, we do have a couple of really good opportunities coming up to save the taxpayer money and to possibly help law enforcement. So you may or may not want to make this one the thing to amend as opposed to I'll just say, going strongly, that we move some of the money into debt service, the debt service fund, as opposed to moving it into KIP, which we'll get to in about 5 minutes, I presume.
Okay, do you want to talk about the other
Last
projects,
item on
Ken?
here then is trenching fiber from the right-of-way to Glenwood City Park. So that's our facility out there. We have really bad internet service. The fiber in that area is coming. So we're hopeful that it's going to come there soon to the right-of-way. But while we have the dollars available, we would put it from the right-of-way where the providers are going to leave the fiber and bring it all the way into our park, which is a long distance, and that gets it to the Welcome Center there. But that's $125,000 worth of fiber. But that would provide the internet service into that park, both for our employees, but also we'd be able to maybe project it into the park for the users of the park to have better service also.
All right. Supervisor Long.
So are there other projects that you consider that maybe aren't on this list that we might want to know about?
No?
Just had to ask.
Yeah. No, not that I can think of. There was a couple projects that maybe had come up and I said, well, that would not be an eligible use. And so those aren't on there. I don't remember what those were offhand. But I don't think I told anyone no on a project that would have been an eligible project. I did prioritize them in this order, but.
Okay, any other discussion or a motion from anyone?
I'll move to approve the amendment number 4 to the 2023 budget for ARPA uses.
All right, motion by Supervisor Long. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Fiedler. Other discussion? Supervisor Counter.
The only thing I was gonna bring up for the amendment was, I guess, for the CASA support, I guess just to at least let them know, if we're not going to say it as a condition of this, but I think that would be something operationally they really need to focus, if they haven't already, to have a plan in place if they're looking to try to get this funded and get it off with other support channels other than through St. Croix County Board, that they would strive to get something put together.
Supervisor Burning.
So what is the expectations for CASA? My understanding is it's supposed to be privately funded at some point in time, completely, not county funded.
Correct. That was the way it was originally presented to us.
Yes, okay. So is there a way to put a stipulation in here that if they're not self-sustaining by a certain time period, that they pay us part of this money back? Is it possible to do that with ARPA dollars?
For one thing, I think it'd be a hard thing to enforce because they're going to spend the money. So
I mean,
I
I just think,
understand the sentiment.
I'm sitting here thinking about like what Supervisor Counter said about, when does it stop? When is this no longer a county program when it wasn't a county program to begin with? And I understand that I know a lot of people that are volunteering in it, and it's doing great things, there's no question. But this is now a lot of money.
Yep.
I mean, originally it was like 25,000, then 50,000, and now it's 300,000.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that we have to cover in here, and there's a lot of tax dollars getting pulled. And man, I don't always like talking to my neighbors about this stuff, but I mean, I got to talk to my neighbors about this stuff and justify why we are giving $300,000 to something that was introduced to the county that was supposed to be privately funded.
Yep. Well, I think A is that we're using ARPA dollars, not our county taxpayer levy dollars. So there's a difference between those two.
But our county taxpayers still pay federal taxes. So it still is, in essence, coming from some people who pay federal taxes. So no matter what, it's all of this is, it's all taxpayer dollars. So whether it's a levy or a sales tax or what do you call it? Oh, I call it a wheel tax, but.
Vehicle registration.
Thank you. Okay. So no matter what that is, that's still coming from people's hard-earned money. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I can support this unless we can split the difference on that and figure out another way to put $150,000 towards something else to help our taxpayers out.
All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Me.
All right, motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, next item, consideration of reclassification requests for 2 FTE licensed practical nurse positions to certified trained medication aid. Okay, Audrey.
So we've had a difficult time, along with everyone, trying to recruit and retain LPNs, or licensed practical nurses. So we are struggling kind of on the medication side of things, and a couple other duties that LPNs would usually do. So there's a request from the healthcare campus to reclassify 2 of those LPN positions to certified medication aides. They are working with their current CNNs to get them trained so that they can promote into these positions, and it will help basically fill the need for medication administration. We would recommend grading the position at 56, which is lower than the current LPN grade. So it would actually create a reduction in the budget, but still help where the help is needed.
Any questions from the committee? No questions, is there a motion?
Motion to approve the resolution to reclassify.
Motion by Supervisor Burning, do we have a second? Second by Supervisor Counter. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are those opposed? Motion carried. Next item, consideration of creating Conservation Planner 2 position. Audrey?
So we are always looking at adding different promotional opportunities for employees. Community Development has come up with the idea of creating a Conservation Planner 2 position. They believe it will provide support to their land use division and also the administrator. That position would take on some of those administration duties so that the administrator could focus on other duties. They're not asking for any additional FTE for this. They're just going to pool their current FTE that they have for their Conservation Planner 1 position. It does require length of service and additional certifications in order to be able to promote into that position. So currently, we don't have any existing employees that would be able to promote into this position at this time, but thinking for the future, if we approve it now, those employees would be able to promote within the next couple of years once they meet those certification standards.
One thing I really like about that too is having that promotional opportunity. So it's something that employees can work towards or strive for, and maybe hopefully will help with our retention. So I think that's a positive thing.
And they're learning those administrative duties too, so maybe even potential for supervisor, department head level position promotions in the future.
Right. Discussion by members. Is there a motion? By anyone?
Motion to approve the consideration of, or a motion to approve the resolution creating Conservation Planner 2 position.
All right, motion by Supervisor Burning. Is there a second?
Second.
You can fight. Second by Supervisor Long. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Next item, resolution amending personnel policy, personal leave of absence. Audrey?
So just making one change to this policy, we'd like to update the maximum length of a personal leave of absence. Currently, it's sitting at 1 year. We'd like to shorten that to 6 months. Personal leaves do provide job protection, so basically we are holding the employee's job for them when they are out on a approved personal leave, which can become an undue hardship for some of the departments if we're approving a year-long leave. It's been especially hard to hire LTEs to kind of fill that position on that part-time basis while those individuals are out on leave. I did do some research of different counties and organizations in the area and beyond. Typically, leave of absence policies go anywhere from 3 to 6 months, so it would get us closer to kind of the standard as well.
Okay, any discussion?
Do you need a motion?
Yes, I do.
I'd make a motion to approve resolution amending personnel policy for personal leave of absence.
Motion by Supervisor Burning, second by Supervisor Counter. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, resolution approving county administrator's work plan and work plan report. Ken?
Well, this is my performance evaluation, really. So I sat down with Supervisor Cook and Chair Long, talked about the goals from last year, how we did, and then really looking forward then to the future goals of establishing what those will look like. So they said, yeah, what I did was fine. I'm meeting their expectations. But looking ahead then, budgeting, that's one of the things that we want to continue to look at. 2 is to continue to emphasize and expand our budget outreach, try to get information out to the public, whether they want it or not. 3 was incorporate the mandatory discretionary services that we had spent, quite a bit of time going over into the budget book. So I've been working on that. Facilities, it's keeping the government center building project on budget and on schedule. So I can make sure Taylor does that one for me. 5 was successfully move into the new administrative wing of the building. That'll occur next summer. 6 then, enhancing the onboarding for elected officials. We'll have election next April. So if we have any turnover on the board, making sure we get them trained up. 7 is to create a new public safety plan, because we still have additional public safety needs, as Supervisor Burning had discussed earlier. So creating a way to find funding for those. And then 8, create an employee recognition program that encourages the high performers. So creating something new that will recognize those high-performing employees. So those are the goals, the work plan laid out for next year. So if there's any questions on the ones that we completed over the past year or the ones for next year.
Supervisor Burning.
I'm assuming that these are in no particular order. These are your goal. Okay.
Yeah, these are the goals that I made some suggestions, they made some suggestions, and then they just adopted all of them.
We thought, let's keep them all, I would say.
There's nothing that was crossed off the list.
Well, I mean, I think Board Chair Long and I had a good conversation with Ken, and thanks for all your work this past year, achieving your goals, and since you were able to work towards those, we thought we'd add more. So, Supervisor Fiedler.
Is it appropriate to ask a question about a couple of the items on here? I'll try to keep it really simple. And item 4, dealing with facilities, keeping the government center project on time and on budget, particularly the words on budget. I know that Ken had worked very hard to try to fill one fairly large space in the new annex, dealing with the probation offices, and had tried very hard to work with the Department of Administration in the state of Wisconsin. But it seems as if we could have a big hole in the budget if we don't do something with that space. And I know, could you just comment on where we sit on that, and if there's any hope of some flexibility to do something on that?
Yeah, so we had anticipated when we laid out this project, we approached both the Department of Corrections and the Public Defender's Office, as well as the City of Hudson Police Department. So the Public Defender's Office never really showed much interest in co-locating in the building. The Hudson PD had, which the county board didn't agree with. But the Department of Corrections was the one that everyone had agreed to at that point in time. So when we designed the building, we created a 7,000 square foot space for them. It's basically this level, the first floor, ground level, over the sheriff's office, so on that back side on the south. So we designed the project, and then once all the bids were in, I was able to determine what our cost per square foot is. So I went back to the state then and says, well, this is what our cost per square foot is. This is the cost for, water, sewer, and utilities and stuff associated with that. We'd have a lease rate of this rate. And they said, no. They said that would be the highest rate we would pay in the entire state. I said, well, it's brand new construction. This is Hudson, Wisconsin, things aren't exactly cheap up here. This is inflation. I mean, you may not be paying this rate right now on any of your leases, but as you start renewing them, this won't be the highest one in the state anymore. But they were like, nope, we're not going to do it. So I kind of just hit a brick wall. So the Department of Corrections still wants to come here. They're renting right now from the Department of Transportation building. They're in that same building there. And they've really outgrown that space. They're up at the end of 2024, I believe. Their lease is up.
Actually, just a couple months after that, in early 25.
Yeah. So their lease is up. So they still need to find a new space. They're not going to have much luck finding anything else in Hudson. The DOA, though, is the one that negotiates leases. And so they are the ones like, well, we don't care what your problems are for the Department of Corrections office in St. Croix County. So right now, there's no deal. That space, we haven't reallocated it for anything else. What we did is we scaled back the improvements in there. So we're not going to finish it, furnish it, paint the walls, drywall it, anything. It's just going to be raw space. So if the county board gets a different offer, we find a different use for it, or a future expansion 5 years from now, we would come in and finish it at that time. So we have a budget savings right now on those finishing costs. If the DOC does come back then next year sometime or anywhere in between now and then and say, okay, fine, we'll pay the lease rate that you suggested, well, then it'll be back on. We'd have to do a change order to the project scope and add that cost back in. But that's where we're at right now on it. So it's really, kind of a game of chicken. But I'm not going to lease the space for less than what it cost us, is basically the bottom line.
And from what I can determine, Ken did ultimately offer them a very reasonable square foot rate, which is very compatible with what that kind of space is going for in the Hudson area now. And as you said, they're outgrowing their space now. They're going to need space, and it's going to cost them a lot more in a year and a half than what that's going on. So perhaps an action item we could help the administrator on, it would be to authorize our chairman of the board to author a letter to our legislative representatives to approach the Department of Administration explaining the need for this, because on merit, I think it's totally needed. The judges would support it, probation supports it, said Department of Corrections supported it. We're just running into one person, I think, at Department of Administration that seems to have their head in the sand. So if I were to make a suggestion, I don't think we need a resolution, but a suggestion that we take the essence of that and that the chair author a letter to our legislative representatives explaining the issue and urging them to approach DOA with a little pressure.
So if it's in the format of a resolution, it should be formalized, come from a committee to the county board. If it's just a letter from the chair, I mean, he has the ability to do that as chair. It's just whose authority he's operating under then, himself as chair, or if he wants the full backing of the county board for that.
I would defer to the chair as to what he'd like.
I support whatever his decision is.
The board chair will consider that, it looks like. Okay.
So it would have to be a future agenda item if you wanted it as a resolution from the full county board.
Okay. Any other discussion? Is there a motion then for the administrator's work plan and report? Motion by Supervisor Long?
To approve the resolution approving the county administrator's work plan.
All right. Second by Supervisor Burning. All those in favor?
Can I make a quick
yep.
comment? I just want to take a quick minute and thank Ken for all his work. We're very, very fortunate in this county to have Ken as our county administrator, as evidenced by his exceptional staff, which I know they do most of the work, right, Ken? No. But anyhow, just want to take an opportunity to thank you very much. I think it's working quite well.
All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Item number 10, resolution reallocating fund balance. Ken.
Yeah, so every year after the audit report is done, we take a look at the fund balance and some of the various major funds that we have. So the main one usually is the general fund. So we look at unassigned fund balance. So we have a 35% plus or minus 3%. So those are the middle bars there. And so then the vertical columns then are representing the fund balance at the end of each year. So you can see again, this year we're over, not as much as we've been over in past years, but we're still about $1.7 million over. When we look at the HHS fund, and I think I mentioned this when we reviewed the audit report, you see that spike up. Really the last 2 years, we've seen that trend going up. Some of that is COVID money that they have not spent yet, so don't get overly excited about their fund balance and try to raid their piggy bank. They are going to spend that on projects that they have. So I do anticipate that'll come down. If it doesn't, then you can go steal their piggy bank, I guess. Bob's smiling now. Yeah. Highway fund, their fund, as you can see, is tracking upwards too. Theirs is a little bit different scenario. If you notice, in 2019 is when their jump started, and it continues to go up. It's really the depreciation value of their building. We built a $27 million building. It goes on their books. They depreciate it every year, which means they gain a little bit more net value, net asset value, as that building depreciates, but they don't make any of the payments, so they don't have any of the expense side coming out, and so that affects their bottom line. We will probably really have to reevaluate our policy on that because it's fund balance at 10% plus or minus. And so that's probably not an accurate gauge going forward, but I think that's going to take a little bit more analysis. On the health center fund, the fund balance, it moved up again this year. So they're not negative, which is a really great thing. And even when you look back at the years where they were positive, that predated me, what they were doing is they were reallocating general fund unassigned fund balance to the nursing home to prop up their books. So we stopped doing that in at least 2016 from when I started. And they did dip negative, but they've been coming back. So what our goal has been for them is that they operate on a net cash flow positive basis. And so that's been our goal, and that's what they've been able to do. Some of this has been due to additional COVID funding that they received during the COVID years. There was just a fairly large increase, though, in Medicaid rates. And so we're hopeful that this trend does continue through their normal operating costs. They are just seeing a lot of increased expense, too, on the personnel side. The other funds then, so the retirement health savings, this big jump was we moved additional money in because this is the one where we have been assigning unassigned fund balance to prop that up. That fund is sunset now, so eventually that'll go away. It's going to take 20 years or more. The health insurance fund balance, we had seen a big dip in 2021. It popped back up in 2022. So I would say that's right on target with where we want to be. Trying to get this to slide over a little bit. The workers' compensation fund, that trended up. This year will be a down year. We had large claims, namely a death benefit payment out of workers' comp, which is a large payment. So this will be a dip year. It'll come back down in 2023. And then the liability fund remains healthy and is continuing on. It has that nice trajectory going up. So I don't know. And look at Heather. She's always getting us sued. Overall, you can see the trend on all of these are positive, and I think that's a really great thing for the county, and to acknowledge the good work that all of our staff are doing across all of these different departments, that everyone is trending really in the right direction. But that brings us back then to what we want to do with the $1.7 million. So my recommendation for you, typically what it would be is move it over to the KIP, because the KIP helps us avoid future debt issuance. So we save both debt issuance costs and interest expense, has the greatest impact for taxpayers. But what we did last year was we moved $7 million of the lost revenue of ARPA dollars into the KIP. So it's really pretty healthy right now. So I have a hard time justifying moving additional money into the KIP right now when it has such a large balance. I think we could take a year off from that. The two recommendations I have for you really is to move $900,000 of the $1.7 million into the debt service fund. That'll give me the flexibility to look at how to lower the tax rate additional for the taxpayers, and the debt service fund is a good way to do that. But what I want to do is I want to steady the taxes. I don't want to rock it up and down. I want to steady it. But this will give me the funds to do that. And then two, the rest of that fund balance of the $1.7 million, I really want to kind of hold in reserve. I've been working with HR. If you remember at all, this year was the year that we went through and we redid an analysis of the McGrath wage grid. So she got that back to us really late. It was too late for me to implement in the budget, because really I have the budget almost done right at this point. So it was too late to implement. Audrey and I are still refining some of that. So what we want to do is just to go forward with the current wage grid through this budget cycle. Everyone is budgeted for a step and a 1% COLA, and then come back at the beginning of next year, present the amended wage grid. If you implement it, though, mid-year next year, there is a cost because everyone realigns on that wage grid. So it's less, for most people, it's less than a step. They just go to the next wage rate that doesn't provide them a decrease. They get moved to here or there, and so we just don't want to give them a decrease in pay. But it's not a very symmetrical transition across those grades. So there's a cost involved in that. And there are some employees then where those positions got reclassified higher where they will see 5 to 10% increases, just because those jobs are rated higher now under the new analysis. So with all those changes, we'd be looking at about $500,000 to implement that. So that's what I want to use the remaining fund balance for. So that's my recommendation on fund
Madam Chair,
balance.
I'd like to move the resolution reallocating fund balance as proposed by the administrator.
Motion by Supervisor Fiedler. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Long. Discussion.
I do have a question.
Yep, Supervisor Long.
So what would be the impact or the possibility of delaying the implementation of the revised grid until 2025? Since it's too late to do it for 2024, I mean, is there much of an impact? I mean, since we don't really know what it's going to cost and how it will impact the 2024 budget, why not just wait till 2025?
Yeah, we talked about that, and the wages are based upon 2023 comparison. So to implement it early into 2024, it doesn't put it too far out of line. If we waited till January of 2025, it just seems like that data is getting really old now. And should there be other changes at that point, which would kind of mean we wasted our money on the analysis. So that's why we've talked about doing it. The impact of implementing it mid-year, anytime you make a fiscal change like that, that creates the structural deficit going into the following year. But the impact is going to be, if we can't afford a step increase, then that might be a year where they didn't get one. They're going to have gotten an increase on January 1 under the current system. They're going to get a partial readjustment or a bigger adjustment depending on where they fell. But if there isn't enough money, that's probably the only adjustment that they're going to have. But it'll be at some point, though, in 2024, so it's not a full 2-year wait until the next one in 26. I don't know, we've debated back and forth on that, but waiting until January of 25 just felt like too long for the data, I think was the big part.
Supervisor Bernie.
So we're going to take $500,000 out of the undesignated fund balance to cover budgeted increases in cost of living and salary and benefits for 2024. That's our plan. With $500,000 of the $900,000 we're moving to undesignated fund.
No, so we're going to take, there's 1.7 million available of unassigned fund balance per our policy. So we'll take 900,000, move it to the debt service fund. That leaves about $800,000.
Yep.
So I'm suggesting 500 of the 800.
Yep.
I have a future use for, and so I didn't want you to necessarily say, well, you have 800,000. Let's go spend it on that. I just want to make sure that you're aware of this wage grid implementation that would be coming in probably the first quarter of 2024. We'd present it. And I wanted you to have the money available to do that if you decide that you would want to implement it at that time.
And
It's
but then
for,
ongoing, is that going to create a structural deficit then?
yes.
Okay. All right.
Supervisor Long.
So wouldn't we be concerned about that?
Sure. So, so a step increase generally costs us, under the current grid, about $600,000. So a $500,000 implementation is a little bit less than a step increase. And so we've had a step increase every year since 2016. What I'm saying is that this implementation jeopardizes the ability of us to do a step increase in 2025. I acknowledge that, but they're just getting that increase earlier rather than later. So I know it creates a structural deficit, but I know how I will plug it in the 25 budget.
And your plan to plug it in the 2025 budget, is that, how solid is that?
It's an educated guess. So, I mean, we have no idea what the net new construction for '25 is, what the shared revenue changes for '25 would be, what the sales tax trajectory looks like if we end up into a recession. There's a lot of variables, and that's how come we don't like to do things that affect budgets multiple years out. I think it's a fairly safe bet, though, considering the track record that we've had, that we've always have been able to find a way to do the step increase, that we would find a way. So if we didn't do the wage grid, or just say we weren't going to do a wage grid at all, we were just going to stay with the current wage grid, in 2025, we would probably find a way to do a step increase, and that would be $600-some thousand. So I'm saying if we implemented the new wage grid using fund balance in '24, they're really getting part of that increase early. And then if we can or if we can't afford anything additional in '25, so be it.
And can you remind me when we would be thinking about doing the wage increase in 2024? I can't remember what you said.
Yeah, so the 2024 budget has a step increase
Right.
And a 1% COLA that'd be effective on January 1. We'd be introducing the wage grid in the first quarter of 2024.
Okay.
And it'd be implemented at a future date because there's some structural changes that would have to be made to the wage system within the Oracle payroll system. And so we need a little bit of time to implement that anyways. So it's going to be a mid-year implementation.
Okay.
I have a question.
Supervisor Burning.
So really, this resolution is just to move 900,000 right now to pay down debt service, and the rest of it stays put until we make a decision on it. Realistically, that's all this resolution is doing.
Yes.
Okay, do we have a motion?
We do, and a second.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. All right. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Good resolution. I like it.
All right, item number 11, resolution approving 2024-2028 capital project plan and funding for 2024 capital improvement projects. Chuck?
All right, the only adjustment we've made since we discussed this at the committee as a whole is the wire meshing in the jail area, which it was at 700,000. It was moved down to 550,000 with a more accurate estimation.
So we're saving money, you're saying?
I won't say that. You're still spending it.
Yeah, there was a couple of projects that were removed, but the one that was outstanding from the committee of the whole was they asked us to go back and review the price tag on that wire mesh.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, there were 2 sprinkler projects that were removed, yes, Supervisor Burning.
Yes, Supervisor Burning.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So, Parks, Cost Center 7620, Project 10099, we moved that up. We're paying cash for that if we do that this year, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so whenever we move to do this, I'm going to ask for an amendment to move that back into undesignated fund, just like what we did with that 800,000 at the 1.7. So just hold your horses on calling a vote, because I'm going to amend it. But anyway, that's all. That's what I wanted to say. So that's what I'm going to be doing.
So you want that paid for from undesignated fund balance instead of from the KIP fund?
No, I want that from, I'm sorry, I want that moved from, if it's in the KIP now, I don't think it is, because we have to move money from the undesignated fund to the KIP, right, to make
No,
this
the
all
KIP
happen?
has 7 million sitting in its savings account. So we have
Okay.
plenty of cash to cover 2024's projects, including that one.
Yep, so this is 920,000 on a total of 3.62 million in projects. So if we delayed that project and put it back to where it was originally intended, 26, 27, I can't remember exactly which one it was, that means our KIP expense would go to 2.7 million.
Okay, I'm tracking what you're saying. I'll repeat it to make sure all the other confused faces understand. What he wants to do is to push it out of '24 back to a later year, and then reallocate 920,000 out of the KIP fund to the unassigned fund balance, to the general fund.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Right? That's would be, or just leave it in the 7 million and not spend it.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that too.
Yep. That's
I mean,
what I
those
want
are
to do.
two different things, but yes.
Well, yes. So I want to just not spend it this year and move it out. Reduce our KIP expenditures to 2.72 million. But I'll make that amendment when the motion comes to the floor, because I'm not making that motion right now.
All right.
Supervisor Long.
So it's the clarification based on our discussion in the committee of the whole. Moving the 920 to the 24 budget was basically a compromise. In return, we moved project 10125, the 16 million to 27, and we moved 10076, the 1.6 million to 26. So basically, there appeared to be, at the committee of the whole at least, a fairly urgent need for the 920. And so the compromise was to move those other projects further out and move the 920 into the 24 budget. And that was basically agreed upon by the committee of the whole. So that was a compromise. I just want to clarify that. I'm not a big fan of it, but apparently there was a fairly urgent need to do something with that Welcome Center or whatever it is in Glen Hills. So I just want to clarify that point, that it, since that was the agreement in committee of the whole, it may not be appropriate to move it at this point.
Well, we can,
Yep, Supervisor Burnham.
if Bob and I have discussion on that, because
Yes.
because I don't want to get into it. I know I'm asking off, not. Okay, so I get that. I understand that, and I fully understand what happened at the committee of the whole. But we have a new community development director, and that compromise came with the old community development director. I'd like to revisit this with our new department head, and see what this looks like. Is it different? Is it, maybe he has a different vision on it. So that's, I guess realistically, that's what I'm saying is I'd like to remove it, but we could talk about it again. Ultimately, we're going to have to vote on it as a board and as a full board, not just us here. So I think in the spirit of more compromise, I'd like to maybe put an asterisk on this dollar amount to really pull out during our next full board meeting, so that we can have discussion around it and have our new department head here to discuss this particular project. Because maybe he sees something differently.
Yeah, it will still need full county board approval of this resolution at the October meeting, and then it becomes part of a supporting document within the budget, so.
Can I ask Court Counsel? Well, can I just ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
What the thing is, but okay. So Heather, is it possible to ask for this particular item to be a completely separate agenda item that we can discuss in the full county board meeting?
It's probably a question for Chair Long and Ken Witt as they create the agenda for the county board meeting, but yes, I believe it could be an agenda item.
Okay, all right. I think then in the interest of being just to those that made the compromise, I would ask for that when this, if someone could include that in the motion when we do this. If that's fair.
I think that's a very fair request, and I don't see any problem with revisiting this project with our new community development director.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So do you want me to make the motion then? Yeah, or is there more?
I will have an additional amendment that I'm going to ask for.
One of the things that we talked about, hold on, let me get it. On the committee of the whole was, this was project 10109, $55,000. We talked about that for some irrigation project, and we had discussed the benefits of moving more toward a self-sustaining type landscape. And that particular item, I thought we had agreed was to be reduced. We were only going to irrigate the flower boxes or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly, but that I had marked as was to be reduced. It's not that much money, but I wanted to ask about it.
Yeah, we definitely did talk about reducing the scope of that project. I don't know that we ended up reducing the dollar amount on there, but it may well come in under budget then with the reduced scope that we were looking at. I think is how we were going to handle it. I mean, maybe it would be 40,000 instead of 55, but without going back and redrawing it and having an estimate at the time, we didn't have a dollar amount. And because of how small the dollar amount is, we just kind of left it. Did you want to talk about the Randox, or you want me to bring that one up?
Oh, you go right ahead.
No.
I don't know that much about that.
So last week at Public Protection Judiciary, the medical examiner brought up an item. And really, it should be a KIP project. She just brought it up last week, though, but I think it merits consideration even at this late time frame. So the Randox machine costs $45,000. So it's another tool for the medical examiner. What it does is you take a tissue sample from one of the bodies, you put it in the machine, it'll run it immediately for 20 of the most common drugs. And so if it has a methamphetamine or it has fentanyl, it's going to alert you right away. So a toxicology screen they send off to the state lab takes 6 weeks to get back. So what the issue is that you have somebody that comes in and you go, were there drugs involved? I don't really know. We're not for sure. They can tox screen it with this Randox machine, and within 24 hours, or really within a couple hours of receiving it, they're going to have that. They're going to be able to tell the sheriff's department, we found fentanyl in them. You need to be searching the site for fentanyl then. This is what you're looking for. Rather than 6 weeks later, oh yeah, it was fentanyl that they OD'd from. Did you find any 6 weeks ago when you were on scene? So it's really a tool for the sheriff's office to do a more targeted investigation as soon after the deceased as possible. The operating cost for it is about $30 per test kit that they would use, so fairly minimal. It's not going to eliminate the need to send a toxicology report. That's still what's going to be court admissible, but it would give an early indicator really used for law enforcement then to be looking for something.
And if I could just add, Public Protection did consider it. We had the medical examiner here. We had a lengthy discussion on it. And I'm going to characterize, as I recall, the sheriff nodding his head at the description, so I'm going to say he supported it, medical examiner did. It's a fairly small amount of money. It takes care of some big issues very promptly, and we had a unanimous vote to support it.
Yeah, so I would ask for an amendment to the KIP plan to add $45,000 for a Randox machine in 2024.
Okay. Supervisor Counter.
Would a machine like that also be able to be where we would be able to have other counties or other forces within the area that would be able to have access and be able to be charged out for helping offset some of the cost of it?
Sure, yeah, there's no reason they couldn't be.
Okay, do we have any other items? Is there a motion by anyone?
Well, you've got kind of a complicated motion here, but I think Supervisor Burning had an exception that he voiced. I think the administrator just made an amendment that he proposed, and I think from what I could gather, all those were more or less acceptable to the committee. So if I could generically make a motion that move the resolution as printed for the 2024 budget requests as amended by Supervisor Burning and Supervisor, well, the administrator's proposed amendment.
Can I get a clarification on what Supervisor Burning is asking for? Yeah.
So, if I was to make an amendment, which I'm not going to because Supervisor Fiedler is already making a motion to include this, is that we pull the project, oh goodness gracious, 10099 off of the KIP plan to discuss as an individual item to be included in the KIP plan on the agenda, completely separate item to discuss and possibly take action.
So I guess my question on that, if I can clarify then, is would you want it removed from the KIP plan and voted on as a separate line item? Or I understood what Supervisor Long was looking at was leave it in the KIP plan, but the item before it on the agenda will be a discussion of this project specifically, and then we'll go in and take our action on the resolution that still has it in. So you'd have to amend that resolution to remove it if the county board decided at that point.
Yes.
Okay.
So you're just asking for a highlight, basically, 'cause
A separate, I want
It's
it as
still
a
in the
separate
KIP.
agenda item, remain in the KIP, but discussed prior to us voting on the KIP so that we as a board have a better understanding of what we want to do and our community development director. I don't know if you can include that in the motion, but that's the general sense of what I would be asking for as a compromise. to
I think
just
I
straight
captured
removing
it exactly.
Exactly.
what you
Exactly.
No, no, well, you said it eloquently.
All right, do we have that in, is that clear to?
You got that, Amy?
minutes? Okay,
A point of inquiry, I would like to make sure that the motion is stated to us prior to us voting on it. Thank you.
So you want me to repeat it? Okay. So
I'm sorry.
wait, we have no second yet, okay.
Oh, I'll second.
Who wants to second?
The chair. Take second, because he's.
Okay, Supervisor Long will second. All right,
So I believe the motion is to approve the resolution approving 2024 to 2028 capital project plan and funding for 2024 capital improvement projects with the amendment by Supervisor Burning to include project 10099 as a separate agenda item on the county board agenda in October and add the Randock machine to the KIP budget in the amount of $45,000.
Okay, only correction I would make, may I?
yes.
It was not an amendment by me, it was included in the motion by Supervisor Fiedler, and I don't think we're approving it, we're recommending it to the full board, correct? Okay, yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I want to make sure. But that is, yes, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, I'm sorry, my wife's on me too, so.
Okay, is there any other discussion? I'll just add that, I mean, we are just, it's the Glen Hills Campground Entrance Station improvements is the one we're talking about, right? Because I think for the audience, they might not know exactly what we're talking about, the 920,000. You know, I think it's an important project, and I'll look forward to discussing it at the county board when we go through it. So, all right, any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, we made it to item 12. Well, I guess we have one more after that. It's on the other page. Item 12, consideration of 2024 requested budgets for administrative departments. Ken.
All right. I got 35 minutes left on my time estimate, so we're going to slow this down a little. So So, in the packet are the budgets. So the way we look at the budget is, the first thing that you want to take a look at is the far right column with the numbers. This is the column that we're talking about right now. And this is fiscal year 2024 operating budget requested. So these are the budgets that were requested by all the departments. The next column over that's blank right now is the recommended. So based upon your input, based upon my meeting with all of the different department heads and with Chuck, we'll come up with a recommended budget that's balanced. So all the requested budgets are 1.7 million over what our revenues are going to be. We know what all the revenues are now. So we know that we have to cut on the expense side or find other revenue sources. So that's how we start looking at the budgets. The next thing we look at, I always look at the very first line, because this is the general property taxes. So the general property taxes, that's what the taxpayer impact is. It doesn't matter, what the total expense is at the end of the day, if it's all covered by something other than general property taxes. But if general property taxes are going up, that's the impact that the taxpayer is going to see. So what we want to do is take a look at 2 columns back, this fiscal year 23 adopted budget. It was 633,000. It's a little tiny. I can't quite read that. I might blow it up just a little bit more. $633,000 compared to fiscal year 24, now we're looking at $805,000. Okay, so whenever that is increasing, it's up by almost $200,000. I want to know what's causing that. So I will slide down the budget then, and we go to the net wages and fringes. So under net wages and fringes was just a sum of all of the wages, all of the benefits added together. So we have a summary there. I take a look at the wages and fringes. And that went from $675,000 to $772,000. So there's a $100,000 difference. So if you remember, we added an additional attorney. Okay, so that explains that. You will see smaller increases in a lot of the departments because you're going to see the 1% COLA adjustment, the step increase, 1% health insurance. There's a little bit of change to WRS benefits. So the sum of those, you're going to see an increase really in all of the departments in that area. But that's how we look at the budget. All right, so that explained a good portion of it, but it hasn't maybe explained all of it. So the next thing I do is I jump down to the total that has the total operating expenses. So the operating total here, if we look at those, goes from $25,000 to $35,000. So there's a $10,000 increase there. So that's not necessarily the whole story either. If we look through the line items, we can see, there's a $6,000 increase on that line item, and that was software subscriptions and renewals. They have a new software program in the department, so that was contributing towards it. But there's some other things that are going on here. So we take a look at trying to get this to, we should change that percentage by just a little bit. So we want to look at, though, what all the changes are. The other thing that changed between the 2 years is fund balance applied. For fiscal year 23, you authorize funding of the attorney for part of the year, so that's where the $65,000 came in from. So that shifts then from fund balance to general property taxes in order to cover that. But really, so what we want to do is look at property taxes, look at how that's being impacted, look at wages and benefits, look at operating, and then go back up those 2 sections to see where the changes are occurring. But that's how we'll take a look at all of the budgets as we go through them. So when we look at the county administrator's budget, you see it goes from 480 to 491. So there's a small increase there, really, the $11,000. If you look at the net wages and fringes from 403 to 411, that's where, the bulk of that is. It's all coming in from the typical changes that we're going to see for wages and benefits. Operating expenses then on that, are very similar. They're $3,000 difference, very close to what they were the previous year. The extra 3,000 is probably Adam or Amy spending it. I don't know which one, but yeah. Oh, actually, it's Amy. There was the other supplies and expenses. This is where we take the county picnic and the employee recognition dinners from. Went from 12,000 to 15,000. So they're very popular. Amy's made them very popular. We had the biggest turnout ever at the county picnic this year at the county fair. So we did have to increase the budget for that.
It's a lot of staff, yeah. That's cool.
All right. We'll go down to self-insurance. So this is our self-insured health and dental insurance programs. There really isn't a huge change. We only budgeted for a 1% increase. We did budget for a larger insurance recoveries, which is matching some of the expense increases, and that's really just the trend that we've been seeing. And we know for 2023 it's going to match that or exceed it also. Not a lot to see there. There's no general property taxes. It's all charged back internally to the other departments. The retiree health savings, surprisingly low this year. If we looked at through August 1st, we were only at $40,000. The prior 2 years were $600,000 and $500,000. So it's very low. So maybe nobody's retiring anymore from the county. That could be a good thing. I think there'll be a couple more at the end of the year here, but this actually should be a down year for us. So no changes then to the requested budget to cover that. And again, as this gets out, it'll probably take about 5 years, but you should see a cresting of it and start to come down then at that point. So really, as we get further and further from that sunset date, you'll see this dollar amount come down. 20 years from now, it'll be zero. I'm not going to worry about that at this point in time, though. Did I skip one over there? Yeah. So risk and property insurance. Remember, we talked about the fund balance. This one's about $3 million. It's still growing. It's fairly healthy. I did increase the budget a little bit for that because we are seeing double-digit increases really for the last 3 to 4 years in the insurance industry. That's an insurance industry trend. We've still been very fortunate, though. Heather's done a great job of avoiding all these lawsuits. So we haven't had any large payouts on them. But we have increased it just to cover those premium increases that we continue to see. Cyber insurance, one of the ones specifically, John and I have been working on that this year. We'll actually see a decrease in it for the first time in 4 years. But when we first bought cyber insurance, maybe 5-6 years ago, John, it was $10,000 a year with a $10,000 deductible. Our current policy, as of this year, we actually just renewed on 9/1, but up until then, we were paying, was it $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, somewhere in that range. I forget exactly what the dollar amount was, but with like a $250,000 deductible. So, I mean, it was up 5-6 fold from what it was a few years ago, but the coverage was a whole lot worse also. So cyber insurance is one of the ones that have really been driving up the total cost of insurance for us. John's done a great job, though, helping keep our premiums low on that. The renewal that we just got, we saw a slight decrease, first time we've had a decrease in years, and part of that is all of the things that he's implemented that have made the insurance company feel comfortable then with where we're at insuring our cyber risk. Workers' compensation, there's no change to that. It's really just an increase based upon our history and the amount of wages that we have. We're going to get into that next, but there was 24 positions requested in the budget, and I'm going to be recommending 14 of those 24 positions. So every position, we pay ourselves a percentage, just like a work comp premium, to ourselves, and then we self-fund for that. So we reinsure work comp at $550,000, which we've only ever hit once since I've been here. But the only increase that you're seeing there is just that increase in payroll really is what's driving that up. The rates have not changed. County boards, I don't think we really had any increase there. I think there's a couple $1,000 increase in the general property taxes, and that's really just very small amounts that have been adjusted, really based upon historical trends. We did increase, it looks like, software subscriptions, and that's going to be part of that new software. You saw the implementation fees in the ARPA dollar reallocation, but the ongoing support then is much different than the prior software package. So we've budgeted some additional dollars there for that, I believe. All right, the county clerk's budget. If we look at their general property taxes, $206,000 to $221, $15,000 increase. When we jump down to net wages and fringes, you're really seeing all of that and more in there. Part of theirs, the big increase, is health insurance. They go from $42,000 to $76,000. When you see a jump like that, it's really just a reallocation of the insurance policies they've had. They might have had a single policy last year, and this year they have a family policy. Much different cost. We charge every department for their actual cost. And so you'll see anomalies like that throughout the budget where it's way up or way down, and it's really just a combination of the policies that the staff within that department have taken out. Really, when you evaluate it across the whole organization, it kind of levels itself off. Looking through the rest of their operating expenses, you see very little change in that. The county clerk dog fund, that's an in and an out. We keep very little of that. It's just we keep it in a segregated fund, so there's the budget for it. Elections, you see this one cycle up and down every year because there's more elections on the even years than there are the odd years. So the costs go up. So that's why you see the increase. Human resources, they go from 607 to 551, so their budget actually decreased. If we take a look at that, net wages and fringes, 475 to 429. So a little bit of that is their health insurance mix decreased, so there's a savings there. And then if we look at their operating expenses, they went from 131 to 112, so they've decreased that. And a little bit of that is just a new manager within that department makes different hiring decisions or different purchasing decisions. And I think the big thing was probably the McGrath study was in there last year and it's not in there now this year. So that's the big thing that's changed between the 2 years. Information technology, so they go from 2.6 million to 2.7 million, so they're up about $120,000. If we look at their net wages and fringes, they're at, I think they're pretty close. I can't tell if that's a 5 or a 6, but they're actually slightly down. Really where their increases is coming in that software subscriptions. You know, the Microsoft, we went from $756,000 up to $821,000. Microsoft, Oracle, all of those software packages are having large increases. Are they double-digit increases on some of those?
Oracle was this year where it wasn't predicted. It was a contract year for them, and I want to say it was 11.
Yeah, 11 to 12% on that Oracle product. When we purchased it 5 years ago, we locked in the rate with rate locks for 5 years. So we came out of that rate lock. So now we got the 11%. So hopefully it won't be 11% every year. It's just coming out of that rate lock that we had. But you'll see the big increase there in IT for that. The finance department, so 638,000 to 637,000. I can't really see those. I'm just making those numbers up.
Fives instead of threes.
So the, you sure those are 5s?
Oh, never mind, I'm looking at the wrong line.
All right. I can see it a little bit. Yeah, we got 25 minutes to go yet. But so the The budget there, pretty much the same as it was the prior year. There hasn't been really any changes. Net wages and fringes, very close to where they were, and their operating expenses are going to be pretty much identical, exactly identical to what they were the prior year. Really, for the finance department, we have a brand-new finance director, so he wasn't going to make any huge changes until he gets a better handle of everything that's going on there. Now, the default center, this is an interesting one. This is really where you see this negative 13 million. These are our other revenue sources, and then we reallocate them back to all the other departments. So our other revenue sources are this forest and cropland. It's when somebody takes property out of forest and cropland, they pay a penalty. This is the penalty. We kind of estimate these every year, and we're usually quite a bit off. Well, it's hard to guess how many people are going to take property out, so I don't know. The general sales tax, so we're budgeting 11 million. For fiscal year 2022, we were at 12 million. And the year before that, we were at 11 million. So this is the $1 million that I talked about that we are always shadowing. And we shadow that intentionally. This is a policy that I've recommended to the county board, that we stay about $1 million under our sales tax projection in order to make sure we end up in the black, make sure we end up fund balance left over, so that I can move that fund balance to other uses and help the county avoid debt issuance and things like that. So the policy's worked out well, but that is a policy that the county board decides. Shared revenues, this is the new $755,000 mixed in with this. Completely unfair. If this is a 0.5%, the $12 million collected as a 0.5%, and they're going to share 1% of the state sales tax with us, you'd expect to see $24 million, right? Yeah, no, we got $753,000 extra. So it went to someone else. But it's more money, and that's where it came in. That's the line item that you're going to see that on.
May I interject really quick?
Supervisor Burning.
Yeah, thank you. So I remember distinctly, because I'm the one that brought it up, that said, is the county's association pushing to make sure that it comes back to us appropriately? And of course, I know it did not. So yes, what I'm saying is I'm with you, Ken. So thank you.
It's great to have the additional revenues, and we are thankful for the state for making that change. But if you look at fairness across the state, it's not here in St. Croix County. So the formula actually really penalized anybody that had net new construction over 2%. There was $10 million of that funding that only went to counties that had net new construction under 2%, which was all but like 7 or 8 counties, which is great, but that's part of the reason why our number was smaller than other counties, because we're doing well. These are some other shared revenue categories. This is the computer personal property tax that was exempted a few years ago. They fixed that dollar amount. They pay us the same amount every year on that. Interest revenues, this is way up. So if you look at the negative interest that we've had the last 2 years, the negative 400,000 and the negative 2 million last year, part of the reason we only had $1.7 million of fund balance instead of $3 million, because we took a $2 million hit to our asset valuation. So we book based upon the current value of an asset. So all of our assets are very safe assets. They didn't lose $2 million. But what happens is interest rates are really low, and we go out and we get a Fed coupon, a treasury bill at 0.5% interest that matures in 2 years. So next year, we value that bill then. If we had to sell that bill, and we didn't wait till its full maturity, but we had to sell it on the marketplace, what could we sell it at? Well, interest rates are now 3%, say. So they would discount that. No one's going to give you full face value because they're only going to earn a 0.5% interest and then go buy a brand new one for 3%. So they say, well, we'll buy it, but we'd only give you 97% of the value. So the value of that, if we sold it on December 31st of 2022, would have been less than that. So we have a decreased book value of those assets. Now, when we hold those to maturity, we still get the full value of those plus the interest, the small amount of interest that they were locked in at. But that's why you see a decrease. So that trend has reversed. Through August of this year, we're already at $1.4 million. So I very conservatively estimated 2024 for that trend to continue to finish at $1.2 million. Now, a lot of that is paper transactions. It's not actual cash coming in and out. So I didn't want to get too aggressive. I mean, you'll very likely see the end of 23 end at 2 million or higher, and you may even see 24 in that $2 million range. It's not all cash value. It's really some paper value that I was talking about. What the $1.2 million does represent, though, is the value of our assets times the current market rate interest. So really more of a cash flow basis. So the $40 million that we generally have as our primary investment by 3% is $1.2 million. And so that's really what I think our cash flow interest earnings will look like for 2024. And then the last item on there was rent revenue. And I think that one is the District Court Administrator's Office. So those are the other revenue sources coming in. I kind of pause on that because this is where the biggest dollars are coming into the budget that have any flexibility and viability. If you read my background note, most of them were talking about this page of the budget. All right, on to the county treasurer. They have a negative dollar amount. That just means that their revenue sources exceed their expenses, so they're giving money back to other departments. It's pretty close to what it was last year, $160,000 compared to $153,000. Their net wages and fringes very similar.
309,
Yeah. Yeah. My eyes are getting a little bit older. Thank you, Supervisor Burning. And again, the about a $5,000 difference in operating expenses. So very small changes within the county treasurer's office. Facilities department, so we go from $2.194 million to $2.3 million. So we are seeing, over $100,000 increase there. It's not going to be in the net wages and fringes. That's fairly close to what it was the prior year, slightly down actually. Where we're seeing that is electricity, water and sewer, gas for heating. If you haven't noticed, we're adding on to the building. Those additional building spaces are going to cost more for electricity and for heating. At least that's what Taylor is telling me. So we have budgeted additional monies there for that. If you haven't noticed the additions, you should look when you go outside. The fleet vehicles, this is really just an in and out. It's an internal accounting for the vehicles, for the operating costs of the vehicles that we have. What expenses go out, we recharge to the other departments. And that is it for the operating budgets. So if you have any input into that, I am making probably final adjustments by the end of next week so that I can have a balanced budget to the county board for the October committee of the whole meeting. So if there's anything in there you really like or anything that you really want changed, now would be a great time to tell me, not at the November public hearing.
Any comments from the committee at this point? I guess not. Thank you, Ken. Okay, our final item, report on new positions in 2024 budget. Ken.
Yeah, I put it on 2 pages so the font would be bigger. So I broke it into categories, so to help us out. So this first whole section are mid-year changes. A lot of these had come to the administration committee for approval. Some of them, the county administrator has the authority to approve if it's just a swap, a one-for-one swap, and there's no budget implications, or if it's a position added with a grant funded. So I don't have to come back to the county board to ask for any additional money. If it costs any additional money, it comes back to the administration committee, and you guys review those and approve those. But these are all the mid-year changes that have occurred. And really, when you add at least the first part of all this up, it's very minimal. I mean, $50,000, $60,000 for all of those changes. The bottom grouping here is 6 positions, 1 for corporation counsel, an investigator, and 4 patrol deputies. That was the big one that was approved mid-year by the county board. So those are in that category of a mid-year change. And part of the 24 position total that was requested, and the 14 that I'm recommending. Next, we have reclassifications within the 2024 budget. So these are changes in title. And so we're looking at a couple of property managers, splitting out the 3 property managers we have into 3 different categories, because really the parks are of different sizes and different complexities. And then a water resource specialist, creating a different title and classification for that position. So they can be done mid-year, or they can be done as part of the budget process. We do them both ways. These groupings are being done as part of the budget, so they'll be effective for the employees as of January 1. Those I'm recommending. And then we have what are the new positions coming into the county that I'm recommending, and then new positions that I'm not recommending. So if we look at that list, so included in the budget are all of these positions, and then included in the recommended budget that you'll see as part of the committee of the whole meeting, I will be excluding that bottom grouping one. So included in the budget are different positions. HHS has an ADRC position. It has a fiscal impact of only $52,000 because it's grant funded. About 45% of it, I think, is grant funded. It has other revenue sources. So I like to maximize dollars. I think Bob's got me figured out there. If he can provide some grant funding on some of these positions, I'm a sucker for them. I like to recommend them then because I like to bring in that revenue source and reduce our part of our capital cost, or part of our operating cost. We have a HHS behavioral health. We have 2 positions there. One of them does have a full cost of about $100,000. The other one is going to be covered through additional billings. So those 2 positions coming into behavioral health, I get a 2 for 1 out of that. The taxpayers will cover part of it, and the other one will be covered through some additional revenue sources. In public health, we actually eliminated one of the public health nurses positions. You don't see a position add because it's actually an existing position already. Epidemiologist, I had to think for a second what that word is. I gotta remember that for Scrabble. So the epidemiologist was funded through grants. Those grants were running out, and so they really prioritized that position over this other position. And so that's one of the things that I encourage the department heads to do, is to reevaluate their positions. If you want this position more than you want this one, sometimes you have to make choices. And that's what they did for public health for this position. So you see one position eliminated, you don't see any budget dollars eliminated because it was reallocated to the other position where we lost the grant funding. So, you know, supervisors ask me every year, you guys are people too. You guys ask me every year, you know, if it's a grant funded position, does it just get lost in there? No, they do not get lost in there. When the grants run out, the positions run out, unless we come up with different ideas of how to fund those. So we do track all that, we watch all of that, and we keep track of it. In public health then, we also have a program support associate. It's a 0.3% increase, additional $17,000. We think we'll have some additional revenue potential with that also. Children's Services, this is the division then at HHS, you know, that I really sympathize with the most. You can see I have 3 different positions here that I'm recommending. Some of them have some offsetting cost to them, but not fully. But that division is really seeing some of the biggest increases in service demands. It is a really tough job that they do. So you can see some additional resources coming into here. The medical examiner, they're asking for a new category. We do the medical examiner really through contract services. And so right now we're paying our current staff, the medical examiner or the deputy medical examiner, $75 every time they do a scan. That's how we compensate them for the different work they do. They're paid time on scene, they're paid by report, they're paid by this or by that. There's different rate sheets. It's in the budget, it's on page 24 of the budget if you ever want to look at those. But we added a new one and a new category. They want to bring in somebody that's certified to do the CT scans, just because they think they'll get better quality of the CT scans. It's the same net cost. I did list the cost here at $7,500, but really there'll be a offset reduction. I just wanted to kind of illustrate what that total cost would be for this new person taking over this task. And then to the positions that did not get funded, there is one in Children's Services, one position I did not fund. Really, we just ran out of money. If you looked at the county board budget priorities, we had 16 items. I think I got through 10 of the 16. So that's where I drew the line, and that's where some of these positions fell below that then. ADRC, they had a volunteer coordinator position that I just couldn't swing funding that position. The clerk of courts, and this is definitely, these are the ones that you can clearly see falling below the line. There's 2 deputy clerk of courts requested. I did not fund those. We have added 2 positions in that department in the last 3 years. So I think that's why they've gotten a lower priority. The sheriff's office, corrections, he asked for 4 correctional deputies there. They do have a need there. That was part of our referendum. But there's probably a larger need on the patrol side than there is in the jail side. You will end up adding additional correction deputies when we do a jail expansion. So this is coming. It's just not the bigger priority this year. And then district attorney, he'd asked for 2 positions, a diversion program, care management specialist. They have 2.5 positions right now. This would be adding an additional position. This wasn't brought up during the budget priorities, so you're not going to see it on that list. And then the legal assistant was one, but that was lower on the list too. That was below the line where I had the cutoff.
I have a question.
Supervisor Burning.
In the last state budget cycle, I didn't even bother to look at this, but did assistant district attorneys get an increase? Okay, good.
Yes.
All right.
Yep. I think by about $8 an hour. Was that it?
I've heard 8 to 12
Okay.
dollars an hour, and same with assistant public defenders. So.
All right, so part of the budget process is for me to report all of the new positions that were requested, the ones that are going to be recommended, so that if you have any heartburn over any of the decisions that I've made so far, you can tell me now, so I can make those changes before I finalize the budget. But this is how the budget's coming together. These are the changes that are necessary in order to get to a balanced budget. So really at this point, if there's anything that needs to come or go, it's a give and take situation.
Although essentially these are our comments to you, right? Because as the admin committee, we're not making the decisions necessarily.
Correct, yeah, I'm not asking you to vote on this.
Right.
This isn't an item that you have to vote on. Per our rules, I'm required to report it to you at this point in the budget process so that you have an early look at it so you can provide some input before it gets finalized.
All right, Supervisor Long.
Ken, can you talk a little bit about the impact of the positions that are not being funded and kind of your plan in the future as to how we're going to address that?
Yeah, so when you look at children's services, so I funded 3 of the 4 positions that they asked for. So I thought that was pretty good. I did talk to the HHS director and said, really where were the priorities? If you had to rank all of those 4 positions, how would you rank them? And so we took the one off that was lowest ranked within there. So we think this one would have the least amount of impact. The other three have a bigger impact. So that's how we prioritize that one. The HHS ADRC, it would be great to have the volunteer coordinator. They do have a lot of volunteers. That work is done by other staff right now. So it would take that work off of them so they could focus on other things. Again, that'd be a really good thing to have, but we're getting by right now. So with limited budget availability, it was something that I didn't prioritize at this point in time. The clerk of courts, the way I looked at that is we have added 2 positions over the last 3 years. I agree that they have additional need. They'll have a bigger additional need as soon as we add another judge to St. Croix County. And so we probably should be working on building up towards that so that it doesn't have 1 year big impact for us. But this probably isn't the year for that. We can probably get by at the rate that we're going. I do agree they have a need, especially with some of the complexities of the cases that are coming in and some of the interpreter scheduling is taking a lot of time. Those are some of the workload demands that are pushing up on them that are creating these increases. The Sheriff's Office corrections, I talked about that a little bit. They absolutely, 4 corrections deputies equals 1 per shift, so that adds 1 person on the floor every shift, so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which would be great. They could probably use it, but they're getting by with what they have right now, and their bigger need will come when we do the jail expansion. So again, I think this is something that we should know is coming and work towards building up slowly too. So that we don't have a 1 year big impact, implement the capital project, implement all the operating expenses at the same time. So again, build up to that, but again, it wasn't a high enough priority for this year to be their year. And then the district attorney, probably the highest one that didn't get funded would be the diversion program care management specialist. Of all the ones that didn't get funded, that probably would have been the next position I funded. It wasn't even on that original list. So the district attorney's office, with the 2.5 staff they have a capacity issue. So they can only put so many people on diversion till the workload exceeds and they can't keep up with it, and then the service level drops off. So you don't want people on diversion that aren't being monitored. So you have a set number of people you can put on diversion. And so therein lies the problem then, is that when you hit your capacity, you're not going to put them on diversion, you're just going to send them through the process and put them in jail. So it's cheaper to put them on diversion. So is this position this year the critical turning point? I don't know. But like I said, that would have been the next position I funded if I had additional resources. Because that's the linkage through the system that could save us more money. And then the legal assistant, he'd originally asked for that the last couple of years, but since we've taken the CHIPS cases down to Corporation Counsel, I'm hoping that relieves some of that. So I'd rather really give that a year with the CHIPS case transfer and then reevaluate it at a later date.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Okay, request for future agenda items. Any requests for items? None? Announcements, correspondence? Anyone? No? All right, the date of our next meeting, October 17th. Thanks for sticking around for the meeting. Oh, Supervisor Fiedler?
Maybe I could just ask a quick question for the future. I think I noted that our December meeting was very late in December. And I think sometimes in the past when we've had very late meetings in the holiday season, we haven't had them. Has there been any thought given to whether we need one in December for planning purposes? Or do we need to make that decision a little later in the year?
Yeah, I
just
think
want to
we'll
raise
probably see if there's any high
Yeah,
priority items that need to be on the agenda in December.
Generally, we have a chance to cancel December or January, but generally not both. And so one of those we probably will be able to cancel. So Supervisor Cook and I can look at those agenda items coming up and prioritize maybe where the best placement would be.
All right. Okay, we are adjourned at 7:05. Thanks, everybody.